A lot of tech professionals are not ready to invest a huge amount of capital. They're looking to expand their existing software development or IT consultancy.
All right, and hello, Bobby. It's a pleasure having you with us. E2 and tech is hand on hand, a wonderful subject today. So let's jump right in. And the first question is a common question that I ask, but can we start with a brief overview about E2 visa?
Yes, definitely. Happy to explain that. So the E2 investor visa is an entrepreneurship visa, and it's intended to allow foreign citizen investors to move to the United States with immediate families, such as spouse and minor children under 21, based on investing in a United States business. And that could be through starting a new enterprise or acquiring a qualifying existing business.
And when we talk about the E2 and we're mixing it with tech, right? Like, why is it relevant for tech professionals nowadays?
It is very relevant tech professionals, and E2 is a very popular visa for tech professionals for the primary reason that E2 visa allows for small businesses to qualify. A lot of tech professionals are not ready to invest a huge amount of capital or establish a huge business enterprise. They're looking to expand their existing software development or IT consultancy from their home country to the United States. And typically, they want to start out small, maybe with a small staff, and oftentimes don't require a huge amount of investment capital. And E2 visa could accommodate that.
And when we talk about the way, so for the people listening to this, what are the eligibility requirements to use the E2 visa as your pathway?
Great question. So the basic requirements E2 visa are the following: that the applicant has to be a treaty national. There are currently about 83 countries in the world right now that are qualified for E2 treaty nationality. And the applicant has to create a genuine business enterprise in the United States through making a substantial investment to capitalize that business. And it needs to be a business that does make meaningful contributions to the US economy, such as through job creation and the generation of substantial income. And beyond that, the applicant needs to show that he or she has the credible ability to successfully manage and operate the business. So they have to show their work experience, their entrepreneurship experience, any business training or experience, etc.
And if someone right now heard, is listening to the podcast and say, like, that's me, I'm ready for the E2. What are the main steps that they need to take in order to start this process?
Another good question. So the E2 investor visa process has essentially two major steps. The first step is that applicant actually has to establish and invest in the U.S. business first before he or she is allowed to apply for E2 investor visa. So establishing a business will begin with creating a business entity, bank account, capitalizing that business, spend a substantial portion of that investment capital to develop that business into a real business, an active operating business, and then be eligible to apply for an E2 investor visa. Now, there's two ways to apply for an E2 investor visa. For most people, they'll be applying with a U.S. embassy in their home country. Now, there are some folks that are already living in the United States on some other type of visa, such as a temporary H-1B work visa or on a student visa. For those folks, they may be eligible to apply for a change of visa status directly inside the United States. But the
All
great
right.
majority will be with the U.S. embassy.
And and this is something it comes up very often when we talk about substantial investment, right? Because it's not really a clear number. So, what does it qualify as a substantial investment? And is it the same for all of the different sectors, or tech is a bit different?
Yeah, this is a very popular question. And the reason is the law is completely ambiguous on how much investment is required to
As
qualify for
usual.
E2 visa. As usual, yeah, right. And it's just simply the law simply states you have to make a substantial investment. And the US government's perspective is that they can't specify a dollar amount that's going to be appropriate for every business model. The US government just wants to be assured that the investment capital is appropriate for the type of business to ensure its success in the United States. So for this is important for the tech industry because a lot of the tech businesses are low cost. The entrepreneur already has a business in their home country, in the tech business. They're simply expanding it to the United States. So to expand to establish the U.S. office, oftentimes it doesn't require a lot of investment spending to get the business up and running because they already have all the tech, the software, the infrastructure needed. So this is a big issue because a lot of tech professionals have find it challenging to demonstrate sufficient investment spending to satisfy or to build a strong E2 visa case. So that's going to require a lot of creativity, and I've dealt with that scenario oftentimes. And there's definitely a way to satisfy the substantial investment requirement for this scenario. It does require some creativity.
Now, I know you said it's sort of it's never clear. It's just very ambiguous. But is there a minimum amount or the certain number that sort of scratch the right itch?
Yeah, good question. So there's literally no minimum investment amount. It's up to the applicant to present the investment amount and the spending into the startup expenses and try to satisfy the adjudicating visa officer that this amount is sufficient to ensure a successful business enterprise, one in which that will generate substantial income and create those multiple meaningful jobs for U.S. workers. However, in reality, if it's a startup enterprise in the United States, the lower the investment amount presented to the immigration officer, the greater the skepticism, oftentimes, the adjudicating officer will have on adequacy of that investment to build a sufficient business enterprise. What they don't want is a business that is too small, one that is so small that it may not generate any jobs or make any kind of meaningful contribution to the U.S. economy. So, although it's possible to theoretically qualify for a very low investment amount in a low five figures, the applicant needs to be aware that's going to create a risk, and especially the U.S. Embassy worldwide are not all equal. Even though E2 requirement is the same for all nationalities, there are certain embassies that what we call high scrutiny
All
embassies,
right.
meaning that they're going to be more skeptical, they're going to be tougher. So typically, I'll recommend, even if the business requires a very low capital, that they commit at least 100,000. That's not a legal requirement. It is a presentation showing the officer that this is not going to be a tiny, tiny little business, and that enough investment capital will be sunk and contributed into the U.S. economy for this business enterprise. So, um, the investor should try to raise and contribute as much capital as possible, even if the business doesn't require all that. Typically, I'll recommend that, okay, even though you don't require to spend a lot to get this business up and running, but you want a strong case, right? You want a high probability of approval.
Exactly.
So sometimes I might recommend prepay some expenses. Look at what your expenditures might be in the next 12 months, real business expenditure. And the more advanced payments you can make, the more you will strengthen your investment amount in your E2 visa case. Um, in addition, some people, the business actually can begin operating before they get the E2 visa. The only restriction is that foreign citizen cannot be living and working in the USA before they get the visa. But if they have a US partner, US employees, and they can manage the business remotely from home country, this business can operate. And when you're operating, the business is incurring operating expenses,
Exactly.
payroll, right? Taxes, rent, marketing expenses. All that can accumulate towards building strong investment spending to support a good E2 visa case. So that's another example of a strategy to compensate for the low startup cost.
And it's a good example of creativity too. It's like, I mean, like it's just a way to like, well, I mean, if I don't have that money to put at once, I can start adding all the stuff I'm going to spend throughout the year. So it makes
Exactly.
total sense. Your to-go tip for the people that is ready for an E2 visa, what will be the best tip you can give them right now?
Do everything right the first time. Get the professional legal advice to do step by step everything optimally, correctly, and properly the first time, so that you don't need to backtrack, have to damage control. Sometimes applicants, and it's not their fault, they don't know the legal requirements or E2 visa nuances and complexities. And they'll go ahead and set up the business, invest their money, and I'll discover the fund source is not qualifying. And the money's already spent. So it's a situation where I cannot reverse what was already done. And we have to start all over again. All the effort, time, money, and energy possibly wasted. So please get the right advice, do it right the first time.